All right, for the wrap up conclusion, the month of training with my client had its ups and downs, but taught both my client and me as the coach quite a bit, which is fantastic. In the initial consultation with my client, he was adamant on starting with 4 days a week, and I complied. Looking back, I think it would have been good to compromise to start with just 2 days and then maybe work up to four. Um, my client did mention as a reflection that he learned that 4 days a week was a bit ambitious as a starting point. I think this really was a good lesson for him, though, to move through because he was so insistent that 4 days a week um, was what he wanted to do because that's what he did before when he was training. The challenge for me was working with very little when it came to equipment that he had um, available and what I was able to provide him in terms of other things that I had, like bands. I provided him some bands. He made it clear he didn't want to join a gym, so that's what we had to work with, which I think went well in his starting in his starting um, starting position and him saying he was starting over in terms of exercise. So focused on body weight, but he did mention it was still challenging, um, but not overwhelming, which is great to hear. So um, he did mention that the core exercises, all the exercises like selections were great. The core exercises, he mentioned specifically that they were pretty challenging and noticed that he had a weak core because if I had prescribed 10, for example, as the reps, he could only do five. Um, and then he had to stop because form would either be broken down or whether his ego is getting in the way there. But this taught me that maybe for the first time that I prescribed something like this, that we start with maybe an AMRAP to see where the client is at and then move the reps from there. Could be um, a good next time to try out, just to also not see where they're at, but also so that it doesn't put them in a space of feeling defeated. And he didn't mention that, but that is something that I want to also consider. When it came to the exercise selection, like I mentioned, he said they were great, and that it was eye-opening how much mobility he had lost in his left shoulder after his injury. And he was doing specific exercises, warm-up exercises, mobility exercises that I had prescribed for him for warm-up to help with that. He mentioned the frequency and length of workouts were good, so that's great. Biggest problem was finding time to do the exercises 3 to 4 times a week. He said that 3 to 4 times a week, maybe at 30 minutes, would have been better, um, which is interesting. But he wasn't sure that the effectiveness of it. But biking, he was able to fit in, and from doing the biking work, he said it's just a part of his life. So that was a very interesting comment. So for lifestyle, I started providing him with a guideline of at least getting all the macros in, so the carbs, the fats, and proteins, at least having those three in a meal. Since he was only eating one meal a day, which drew a huge red flag for me. So after the first week, he mentioned that trying to get 30, I had just prescribed him to 30 to start with, to try to get 30 fat, carb, and protein for the macros. And he said he felt overwhelmed and it was really challenging, specifically for the protein to get to 30. Looking back in terms of my learning, I wonder if just starting him with more of a visual of what a nutritious balanced plate could look like rather than giving him the number would have worked better in this case. While this didn't go as planned, I still do think that it had the effect that I wanted. which was to get him to be conscious of eating 3 meals a day and starting to work on including balanced macros in them. My client learned that during this process that the calories are not an equal sum equation, so calories in equals calories out, which was what he was thinking in his mind. He mentioned that he was skeptical about it and just stuck with the plan and was pleasantly surprised that he saw it working. As he mentioned that he lost weight, his clothes were fitting better, and he felt better just in general about himself. He learned that, yeah, his protein intake needed to increase, which is definitely what needed to happen. My favorite learning that he shared was that he learned to enjoy the process and the body learning. So that pattern focus goal to get his goals. So that was really cool to hear. In general, what went well was my client mentioned that he was happy with progress that was made. He felt an increase in energy. Clothes were fitting better, like I mentioned, and has created a conscious habit where he drinks less coffee, which is fantastic, and tries to drink a liter of water after his first cup. He is also more conscious on eating slower and having 3 meals a day, which is also fantastic. I also just started to see when we got into the exercises, he was starting to understand pacing a bit better with the bike progress. And the best result is that he named that he sees the benefit in slow progress. So, working in those activities that he enjoys, which is biking and disc golfing, I think was like a great way to just incorporate that into his plans, because this is something he really enjoys, and that was actually the thing that he stuck to throughout the weeks. The challenge when it came to the program was to help him stay consistent with the training. There were a few underlying factors, like he was learning how to fit it into his schedule and lifestyle and his ego a little bit, not allowing him to train one less day. I did have a conversation with him to discuss this when I did see the pattern, but he insisted that he could do those days. As a coach, I learned that there has to be some space to let your client experience what they want, especially when they're being so adamant. And then when they recognize or learn whatever they need to for themselves, we can then move forward. He did mention that he was overly aggressive with the process, which was a great lesson for him. I did see the pattern continue, unfortunately, through the rest of the month. So I decided to help him reset by doing going back to basics and giving him some prompts to help him evaluate his goals and motivations to see if we can get him back on track. That didn't work, as he was kind of just already disengaged. But he mentioned that he did see it and that he was sorry for not completing it. The game plan moving forward, I had a conversation with him in terms of if he would like to continue working with me as a coach to accomplish his goals. He mentioned he wanted to go it on his own for exercise, but he wanted to still work with me on nutrition. Some of his goals for exercise included getting back into running and hopefully working up to doing multi-day biking, which is great. So while I already mentioned some of the learnings for me as a coach throughout what I just mentioned, one of the biggest takeaways is just finding ways to communicate and prescribing ways to slow down the process for my client and help them progress a step at a time. I pivoted within the space as it was happening. Some things worked, others didn't. And that is where I found that I need to just continue to build my knowledge and experience around those things that didn't work. However, I do think that this final project was a great way for me to work with my first ever client as me as a brand new coach and learn just a whole lot. But yeah, thank you so much.